68. His previous non-compliance with the CCO, which occurred back in May 2020, was premised upon his ideological beliefs. This is cited as evidence of risk, as his reluctance to engage in mental health treatment. His criminal history involves some violence and some past difficulty with anger management, based on information provided by his de facto partner, and these are said to be matters that heighten risk. The brush that these police have got is just endless. We can see that the aim that they had now coming back, and the little brushes that they stroke to get to their aim is very, very apparent. And the way they structure the language as to their end goal is to talk about a risk that isn't factual at law. They're talking about this quackery wherein it's gambling, a probability, a statistic. How can any of this quackery be held as any form of evidence? So we can only go on what's happened before. We've got no idea, is what they're saying. We're taking a gamble in that we hope this guy is actually a terrorist. They don't understand that they're the ones terrorizing the civilians on this land. It's very, very apparent by the actions that they've created that are very clearly brought forward in this court case. 67. The plaintiff submits that the risk is unacceptable, given that the defendant had previously made threats to police officers that may reasonably be interpreted as death threats. That's like putting a video together demonstrating that a crime has been committed wherein the punishment is a death. Rule 92 of international humanitarian law would see an international penalty take place if the state of New South Wales was to condone that kind of activity and its agents were to participate in that kind of activity. So what could be interpreted as a death threat? The actions that we're seeing by fixated persons against a normal everyday Australian, or the repercussions for those actions. 66. Regarding the second risk scenario, the plaintiff submitted that the risk assessment report author has concluded that the defendant is, quote, vulnerable to acting or engaging in violence to achieve the goals of the United Kingdom of Australia. If the narrative was to shift towards the people of Australia adopting roles within the kingdom, that is creating perceived legitimacy for engaging in violence, warfare policing, and or military jurisdiction, close quote. So you can see through this reversal now that they are actually admitting who they are, in that warfare policing is the jurisdiction in which they take command right now as peacekeepers who are obligated to international humanitarian laws that they just broke. And their fear is that people adopt their homeland and take a right of self-determination in international law, which would hold them to account to the international humanitarian laws they've broken. Self-determination is the right of a people to be the people they were before these peacekeepers turned up. Right? The right of a people to recognize who they are in international law and stand up and be those people peacefully in that international stage, is an international right, a right that should be defended and protected by these peacekeepers. We have a right at international law to remember the gods of our fathers, Judges 2:12. So these are the justice's words, but from the police's point of view, in that the narrative shift that she's worried about is this changing of allegiance to a crown other than the crown which would occupy your lands, could change a perceived legitimacy within an international scope wherein there are larger players at play, and one needs to recognize this occupied status, which brings about this defense of the Constitution. The garden is bankrupt, and they're going to take control of your bankrupted garden with war machines and their monetary systems. You had an opportunity to look at your garden and do something about it, but instead you chose politics which would seek to play party with them to help them to rape and damage your garden further. This has always been the problem that I've tried to point out, is that you're not making the garden grow. You're actually helping someone else till the soil till there's nothing left. 65. I interpolate here, in regard to these statements, that I do not see any of them having sufficient clarity of proposed action to amount to a call to arms for violence. There's no violence in this call to arms for a curial change in your governance and a return back to what would stand in that international law that would see a lot of these accountabilities start to take place. It's called a right of self-determination. It fits in with international law. It stands in with the blessing of Almighty God. And it finds its foundations over 100 years ago. 64. Whilst there are disavowals of violence in the material, these disavowals occur alongside statements such as, quote, got to start carrying out action to deal swiftly with foreign administrators ruling over our country with no rule of law, close quote, and, open quote, I have now given you enough evidence to crucify this man, close quote, and, open quote, no one is truly prepared for what is coming, close quote. A little bit of knowledge, I'll add my little flavour here. I don't want to say too much. Foreign administrators ruling over our country with no rule of law. They are nannies. They follow a rule of law that is touted by Scott Morrison, or now Albo will tout this word as much as he possibly can on the world stage. Rule of law. You all have to follow by rule of law. You all have to give up everything that you are because rule of law said that you've given it up already. You'll own nothing, and now you're going to enjoy it, is what they're saying. Rule of law, when it comes to a line of authority, you still have a judge, and a judge is still going to hear crimes. There are things that have affected you as a country in a financial burden, but it doesn't detract from the fact that there will be people that uphold some form of the law. I have now given you enough evidence to crucify this man. Well, now I've given you enough evidence to crucify the entire state. Look at what's happened. And crucify, that's a literal. It doesn't mean go and nail someone to a cross, does it? It's a literal. It tends to lean towards holy, holy, holy. Look at what this man's done. I've given you enough to see this man put before justice. And no one is truly prepared for what's coming. These words were said in 2021, before 2021. Are you now ready for what's coming, having seen a food crisis, having seen a bio-warfare crisis, having seen a financial crisis, having seen a planned WEF strategy to fourth industrialize the world, a great reset, an opportunity during a bio-warfare incident for a great reset?